300 guests in silk and diamonds, a chandelier worth more than most people's homes, and at the center of it all, a 9-year-old boy holding a microphone, standing next to a woman in rags with a tiara on her head. Micah Ashford felt his knees go weak. His son had chosen. And when the old woman looked up and locked eyes with Professor Lionel Graves across the ballroom, and Graves turned white as bone, Marcus understood that this night had just become something no amount of money could control. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ashford estate like liquid gold, painting the marble floors of the main hall in warm, honeyed light. Staff moved in every direction, florists arranging towering displays of white roses and orchids, caterers wheeling silver trays through the kitchen corridor, an event coordinator barking orders into a headset. Tonight was the night, the 10th anniversary gala of the Ashford Foundation, and every detail had to be flawless. Micah Ashford stood at the top of the grand staircase, adjusting his cufflinks as he surveyed the controlled chaos below. At 45, Marcus carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had earned every inch of his empire. His jaw was set, his posture rigid, his dark eyes scanning the room the way they scanned quarterly reports, missing nothing. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars, but the truth was, Micah Ashford had once owned exactly one pair of shoes, and they had holes in them. He didn't talk about Baton Rouge, not the apartment with the water stains on the ceiling, not the nights his mother worked double shifts at the hospital laundry while he studied organic chemistry by flashlight because the power had been cut. He had buried that boy so deep beneath boardrooms and billion-dollar deals that sometimes he forgot the boy had ever existed. Almost. "Daddy?" Marcus turned. Micah stood in the hallway behind him, already dressed for the evening. A cream shirt, a charcoal vest, a little brown bow tie that he had insisted on tying himself. The boy was 9, but there was something ancient behind his eyes, something watchful. Micah didn't run through the house the way other children did. He moved through it like a visitor in a museum, studying everything, touching nothing. "You're dressed early," Marcus said, smiling. "The gala isn't for another 8 hours." "I know." Micah stepped forward and stood beside his father at the top of the stairs, looking down at the preparations. "I wanted to watch them set up." Marcus studied his son's face. There was a stillness to Micah that unsettled some people, teachers, other parents, even Vivian sometimes. But Marcus understood it. The boy wasn't distant. He was absorbing, taking in the world in a way that most people had forgotten how to do. "I have something to tell you," Marcus said, crouching down to meet his son's eyes. "Tonight, at the gala, I'm going to let you do something special." Micah tilted his head. "What?" "Every year, we choose a guest of honor, someone we celebrate, someone we bring to the stage and recognize in front of everyone." Marcus placed his hand on Micah's shoulder. "This year, I want you to choose." The boy's eyes widened, not with excitement, with something closer to reverence. As if he had been given a responsibility he took more seriously than any adult in the building would. "I can choose anyone?" Micah asked. "Anyone," Marcus said. Micah didn't smile. He nodded slowly, like a promise was forming behind his ribs. Later that morning, while the estate hummed with preparations, Micah sat in the back seat of the family's black Escalade as the driver took him to his piano lesson, the same route they took every Saturday. The car turned onto Westheimer Road, past the row of boutiques and galleries that lined the street near the River Oaks estates, and then slowed at the traffic light 3 blocks from the house. And there she was, the same woman. Every Saturday for the past 5 months, sitting on the same curb in the same spot, wearing clothes that looked like they had been worn through 100 storms. She was old, very old, with silver-gray hair pulled loosely behind her ears and skin the color of dark walnut, lined with decades of sun and sorrow. Her hands rested in her lap, and she stared straight ahead at nothing, as if the world had moved on without her, and she had simply stopped trying to keep up. Micah pressed his palm against the window. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Everything okay, little man?" "What's her name?" Micah asked quietly. "Whose name?" "The woman on the curb." The driver looked, shrugged. "I don't know, buddy. Probably nobody knows." The light turned green. The car pulled away, but Micah didn't take his hand off the glass until she had disappeared from view. That afternoon, while Vivian directed the placement of the seating cards in the ballroom, each one hand-calligraphed, each one representing someone important, someone powerful, someone who mattered, Micah sat on the floor of his bedroom, staring at a small rhinestone tiara he had taken from the decorations table when no one was looking. He turned it over in his hands. The fake diamonds caught the light and scattered tiny rainbows across the ceiling. He already knew who the guest of honor would be. He had known the moment his father asked. The gala was 5 hours away when Micah slipped out the service entrance at the back of the estate. No one noticed. The kitchen staff were arguing about whether the lobster bisque should be served in white bowls or gold-rimmed ones. The security team was running perimeter checks at the front gates, where the first news vans were already setting up. Vivian was upstairs in her dressing room, getting her hair pinned into an elaborate updo that had required 2 stylists and an hour of silence. Micah walked quickly, his little dress shoes clicking against the sidewalk. The tiara was tucked under his vest, pressed flat against his chest. He could feel its edges digging into his skin, but he didn't adjust it. It felt right to carry it that way. Close, like a secret. 3 blocks. That was all it took to leave the world of marble and manicured hedges and step into a different version of Houston. Not dangerous, just forgotten. A stretch of road where the sidewalk cracked and the bus stop bench had been missing its backrest for years, and nobody had bothered to fix it. She was there. Same curb, same spot. Sitting with her knees drawn slightly toward her chest, her hands folded over a cloth bag that held everything she owned. Her dress, if you could still call it that, had once been blue. Now it was the color of dust and rain and time. Her silver hair was thin and loose, catching the late afternoon breeze. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes were clear, sharper than anyone would expect from a woman in her condition. Micah stopped 3 feet away. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his ears. The woman looked up. She did not startle. She studied him the way someone studies a bird that has landed unexpectedly close, with curiosity, not fear. "Hello," Micah said. She blinked. "Hello, child." Her voice was low and steady, carrying an accent that Micah couldn't place, something musical, something far away. Nigerian, though Micah wouldn't know that word for hours yet. "What is your name?" he asked. She tilted her head, as if the question itself were surprising, as if no one had asked her that in a very long time. "Odera," she said finally. "My name is Odera. Miss Odera." Micah reached under his vest and pulled out the tiara. It caught the golden light of the late afternoon sun and threw tiny sparks across the pavement between them. "I want you to come to a party tonight, at my house. You're going to be the guest of honor." Odera stared at the tiara. Then she looked at the boy. Really looked at him, his pressed vest, his careful bow tie, his eyes, which were enormous and steady and completely serious. "Child," she whispered, "I think you have the wrong person." "No, ma'am." Micah stepped forward and very gently placed the tiara on her head. His small fingers adjusted it against her silver hair with a tenderness that made Odera's breath catch in her throat. "You're the one I've been looking for." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The traffic hummed behind them. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The world kept turning, indifferent. But something had shifted on that curb, something invisible and enormous, like the first crack in a dam. Odera's eyes filled with water. She pressed her lips together and looked away. "I don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't have to," Micah said. "Will you come?" Before she could answer, a black Escalade screeched to a stop at the curb. The driver's door flew open, and then the rear passenger door, and Marcus Ashford stepped out with a face like thunder. "Micah." His voice was low, controlled, but vibrating with a fury that only a terrified parent can produce. "What are you doing? Do you have any idea? The entire house is looking for you. Your mother is—" He stopped, because he saw the tiara, and he saw the woman. Marcus looked at his son, then at the elderly woman sitting on the curb in filthy clothes with a rhinestone crown on her head, then back at his son. "Micah," he said again, slower this time. "What is this?" "This is Miss Odera," Micah said calmly. "She's the guest of honor." Marcus felt the ground tilt beneath him. He opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at the woman again. She was staring up at him with an expression he couldn't read, something between shame and dignity, refusal and surrender. "Son," Marcus said carefully, crouching down, "when I said you could choose anyone, I meant someone from the guest list, a friend, one of the board members, someone—" "You said anyone." Micah's voice didn't waver. "You said I could choose anyone, and I choose her." The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. He could hear the driver shifting uncomfortably behind him. He could hear, faintly, the sound of his phone buzzing in his pocket. Vivian, no doubt, calling for the 5th time. He looked at Odera. She was already reaching up to remove the tiara, her hands trembling. "It's all right, child," she murmured. "Your father is right. I'm not— Please don't take it off." Micah's voice cracked for the first time. His eyes glistened. "Please." Marcus Ashford had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without flinching. He had stared down hostile board members, survived hostile takeovers, built an empire on nerve and will. But his 9-year-old son, standing on a cracked sidewalk with tears threatening to spill, asking him to honor a promise that brought him to his knees in a way no boardroom ever had. He stood up. He looked at the woman. He took a breath. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "it seems my son has made his decision. Would you be willing to come with us?" Odera's hand froze on the tiara. She looked at the man in the suit, then at the boy with the bow tie, then at the black SUV gleaming at the curb like a spaceship from another world. "I'm not dressed for a party," she said. "We'll take care of that," Marcus replied. And for the first time, something in his voice softened, not because he understood yet, but because his son's conviction had opened a crack in him that he couldn't seal back shut. Micah took Odera's hand and helped her stand. She was unsteady, her knees ached, but she rose, and the tiara stayed on her head. The Escalade pulled through the estate gates at 10 minutes past 4. By the time the rear door opened, Vivian Ashford was already standing at the front entrance, arms crossed, her freshly styled hair pinned immaculately in place, her silk robe catching the afternoon wind. Her face held the kind of calm that was more dangerous than any shout. "Marcus," her voice was ice wrapped in velvet, "where has he been? I've been calling you for 40 minutes. The florist needs approval on the centerpieces, the string quartet is asking about the playlist, and our son was missing from this house with—" She stopped, because Micah had stepped out of the car. And behind him, slowly, carefully, a frail elderly woman emerged, her clothes stained and torn, her shoes held together with what appeared to be duct tape, and on her head, catching the sunlight like something out of a fairy tale, a rhinestone tiara. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Marcus," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut like a razor. "What is this?" "This is Miss Odera," Micah said before his father could answer. "She's the guest of honor tonight." Vivian looked at her son, then at the woman, then at Marcus. Her eyes were wide with something that went beyond surprise. It was horror, the social kind, the kind that sees a reputation crumbling in real time. "Inside," she said. "Now, all of us." The foyer felt enormous with the 4 of them standing in it. Odera stayed near the door, her cloth bag pressed against her chest, her eyes moving across the chandeliers and the marble and the oil paintings on the walls as if she had stepped into a dream she expected to wake from at any moment. "Marcus, a word." Vivian took her husband's arm and pulled him into the study. The door closed behind them, and her composure shattered. "Have you lost your mind? You let our 9-year-old wander 3 blocks into the street and bring back a homeless person, and you're telling me she's the guest of honor? Tonight, in front of the mayor, in front of Senator Williams, in front of every camera crew in Houston? I know how it looks, Viv. How it looks. Marcus, this isn't a look. This is a catastrophe. Do you understand what people will say? That the Ashfords have lost touch. That we're turning our foundation gala into a circus. We'll be the punchline of every society column in Texas by morning." Marcus rubbed his temples. She wasn't wrong. Every word she said was strategically correct. He had built this gala to attract donors, secure partnerships, and reinforce the Ashford brand. Bringing a homeless woman in off the street, a woman no one knew, no one had vetted, no one could vouch for, was the kind of move that could unravel years of careful positioning. "I told him he could choose anyone," Marcus said quietly. "Then untell him. He's 9. He doesn't understand what's at stake." "He understands more than you think." Vivian stared at him. "So what do you want to do? Put her in a gown and sit her next to the governor?" The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. "Yes," Marcus said, "that's exactly what I'm going to do." Vivian's face went through several colors in rapid succession. She opened her mouth to argue, and then something in Marcus's expression stopped her. A stubbornness she recognized, the same stubbornness that had built Ashford Pharmaceuticals from a rented lab in Baton Rouge. When that look appeared, arguments were useless. "This is a mistake," she said flatly. "And when it blows up, remember, I told you so." She walked out of the study without another word. In the upstairs guest suite, 2 of the household staff helped Odera bathe. They were gentle, but Odera could feel their discomfort, the careful way they avoided her eyes, the way they held her clothes at arm's length before placing them in a plastic bag. She didn't blame them. She had been invisible for so long that being seen now felt almost violent. The warm water hit her skin, and something in her chest loosened, a knot she hadn't known she was carrying. She closed her eyes, and for just a moment, she was somewhere else entirely. A laboratory in Lagos. White coat. Clean hands. The hum of a centrifuge spinning her life's work into something that would save millions. Then the memory dissolved, the way it always did, replaced by the sound of running water and the soft voices of strangers. They brought her a dress, deep navy, simple, elegant. It fit loosely on her thin frame, but when she looked in the mirror, something flickered in her reflection that she hadn't seen in years. Not beauty, she was long past caring about that, recognition. She recognized herself. The tiara still sat on her head, no one had dared remove it. Downstairs, the guests had begun arriving. Black cars lined the circular drive. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns streamed through the entrance, greeted by champagne and the soft sounds of a string quartet playing Debussy. The ballroom glittered. 300 place settings, crystal glasses, candles reflected in every surface like a room full of captured stars. Vivienne moved through the crowd with surgical precision, greeting every guest by name, deflecting questions about the evening's program with a smile that revealed nothing. But inside her stomach was a fist. And then the whispers started. Someone near the entrance had seen Odera being escorted through the hallway. A server had told a guest. A guest had told another guest. And now, like fire through dry grass, the question moved through the ballroom in hushed, scandalized tones. "Who is the woman upstairs? Did you hear? The boy picked her off the street. Is this some kind of stunt?" Marcus stood at the bar, a glass of bourbon untouched in his hand, listening to the murmurs spreading around him like smoke. He had made his choice. But standing here now, hearing the doubt hiss through his own gala, he felt the first tremor of something he hadn't felt in years. Fear, not of failure. Marcus had failed before and survived. This was a different kind of fear, the fear that his son had seen something in that woman that Marcus himself was not brave enough to see. The ballroom doors opened at exactly 7 o'clock, and Odera stepped through them like a woman walking into her own execution. The navy dress hung gracefully on her thin frame. Someone had found her a pair of low-heeled shoes that fit reasonably well. Her silver hair had been brushed and gathered into a soft twist at the nape of her neck. But it was the tiara that drew every eye in the room, still perched on her head, catching the chandelier light and scattering it in tiny bursts of white fire across the walls. 300 guests turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Micah walked beside her, his small hand resting lightly on her arm, guiding her the way a prince might escort a queen. His face was serene. He seemed utterly unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that every person in the room was staring. Marcus watched from across the ballroom. He had positioned himself near the bar, where he could observe without being the center of attention. He saw the reactions ripple through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Raised eyebrows, whispered comments behind cupped hands. A few guests openly stared with undisguised confusion. Vivian materialized beside him. "They're talking," she said through a smile that was bolted in place. "Everyone is talking. Let them talk." "Marcus, Senator Williams just asked me if this is a social experiment." Those were his exact words. Marcus said nothing. He watched Micah lead Odera to a table near the front of the room. Not just any table, but table 1, the one reserved for the guest of honor, flanked by the foundation's most important donors. Micah pulled out a chair for her. Odera sat down slowly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes darting across the place settings, the crystal glasses, the silver cutlery, the linen napkins folded into precise fans. She touched the edge of the tablecloth with her fingertips, very lightly, as if testing whether it was real. At 20 minutes past 7, the side entrance of the ballroom opened, and Professor Lionel Graves walked in. He was tall and lean, with silver hair swept back from a tanned face and pale blue eyes that carried the practiced warmth of a man who had spent decades being admired. His tuxedo was impeccable. His smile was automatic. He shook hands as he crossed the room. A senator here, a CEO there, a handshake that lingered just long enough to make each person feel important. Graves had flown in from Boston specifically for this gala. He and Marcus had been partners for 8 years. Graves Biotech supplied key licensed compounds to Ashford Pharmaceuticals, and the relationship was worth hundreds of millions annually. Tonight, they were expected to announce an expansion of that partnership. It was supposed to be the highlight of the evening. Graves approached table 1, his arm extended toward the empty seat reserved for him, and then he saw her. He stopped. His hand, still extended toward the chair, hung in the air. The color drained from his face so quickly, it was as if someone had pulled a plug. His practiced smile collapsed into something raw. Not anger, not surprise, but recognition. The deep, visceral kind. The kind that comes with a history you thought you'd buried. It lasted only a moment. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then the mask slid back into place. Graves pulled out his chair, sat down, adjusted his cufflinks, and turned to the guest beside him with a remark about the weather in Houston. But in those 2 or 3 seconds, something had been exposed, and someone had been watching. Nkechi Okafor sat 4 tables away, a press lanyard around her neck, a small notebook open on her lap. She was 35, sharp-featured, with close-cropped natural hair and the kind of quiet intensity that made people either deeply comfortable or deeply uneasy. She had been assigned to cover the gala for the Houston Chronicle. A puff piece, her editor had said. Foundation anniversary, billionaire philanthropy, champagne and good lighting, easy copy. But Nkechi hadn't become a journalist to write easy copy. She had come to the United States from Enugu, Nigeria at 19, put herself through Columbia's journalism school, and spent the last decade covering stories that powerful people preferred to keep buried. She had a nose for the moment when a room shifted, when something real broke through the performance. And she had just watched Professor Lionel Graves lose his composure at the sight of an elderly woman in a tiara. Nkechi's pen moved across her notebook. She wrote 3 words and underlined them twice. He knows her. She studied Odera from across the room. The woman's face, her bone structure, the way she held herself, even in borrowed clothes, even visibly uncomfortable, there was something in her posture that didn't match her circumstances. A straightness in the spine, a way of holding her chin that spoke of a life lived with purpose, not desperation. Nkechi pulled out her phone and began searching. She didn't know what she was looking for yet, but every instinct she had was firing at once. At table 1, Odera sat perfectly still. She had not looked at Graves. She had not acknowledged his presence. But her hands, folded in her lap beneath the table where no one could see, were trembling. She knew exactly who was sitting 3 chairs away from her. She had spent 30 years trying to forget his face. And now, in the last place she ever expected, in a borrowed dress at a billionaire's party with a child's tiara on her head, there he was, the man who had taken everything from her, the man the world called a genius, the man who had built his empire on her mind. Odera kept her eyes forward. She breathed. She did what she had always done in the presence of the unbearable. She endured. But somewhere deep inside the ruins of what she had once been, something stirred. Not hope, not anger, something older than both. Memory. Nkechi Okafor worked fast when something caught her attention, and right now every nerve in her body was lit. She had excused herself from the ballroom and found a quiet corner in the estate's library, a room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books that probably no one had ever read. Her phone was open, her notebook beside it, and her fingers moved across the screen with the speed of someone who had spent a decade pulling threads that powerful people didn't want pulled. She started with the face. She had taken a discreet photo of Odera from across the ballroom, just enough to capture the woman's profile, the sharp cheekbones, the set of her jaw. She ran it through every academic database she could think of. Nothing on the first pass, nothing on the second. Then she changed the search. Instead of facial recognition, she went old-fashioned. She typed in keywords: Nigerian pharmacologist, malaria research, 1980s, Lagos. The results were sparse, buried under decades of newer publications, corporate press releases, and the relentless churn of the internet, burying what it didn't care to remember. But on the 4th page of results, she found it. A scanned article from a 1986 issue of the West African Journal of Pharmaceutical Sciences. The photograph was grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. A young woman in a white lab coat standing in front of a centrifuge, holding a petri dish up to the light. The caption read, Dr. Odera Nwosu, University of Lagos, Department of Pharmaceutical Chemistry, presenting findings on novel artemisinin-derived compound OD7. Nkechi's breath caught. She enlarged the image. The young woman's face, 40 years younger, full of fire and certainty, was the same face she had just seen sitting at table 1 with a rhinestone tiara on her head. She kept digging. The trail was fragmentary, like a road that had been deliberately broken apart. Dr. Odera Nwosu had published groundbreaking research on a synthetic compound derived from artemisinin, the same family of molecules that would go on to revolutionize malaria treatment worldwide. Her compound OD7 showed extraordinary promise in early trials. It was faster acting, more stable, and cheaper to produce than anything else on the market at the time. And then, in 1989, the publications stopped. Dr. Nwosu's name vanished from the academic record as completely as if she had never existed. But the research didn't vanish. It reappeared 2 years later, in 1991, under a different name, a paper published in the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, authored by a young American researcher who had spent a sabbatical year at the University of Lagos, Professor Lionel Graves. Nkechi stared at her screen. Her hands had gone cold. She scrolled through the 1991 paper, comparing the methodology, the molecular diagrams, the trial protocols. They were identical to Odera's earlier work, not similar, not inspired by, identical. The only difference was the name on the cover page. Graves had taken OD7, renamed it GR91, published it as his own, and built an entire career on the foundation. The compound had been developed, refined, patented, and eventually licensed to pharmaceutical companies around the world, including, Nkechi realized with a chill that ran down her spine, Ashford Pharmaceuticals. She pulled up the Ashford corporate filings. There it was, buried in the intellectual property disclosures. Ashford's anti-malarial drug line, the one that had generated over $2 billion in revenue over the past decade, was built on licensed patents originally filed by Graves Biotech, patents that traced directly back to GR91, which traced directly back to OD7, which traced directly back to a woman who was now sitting in a borrowed dress at a billionaire's gala, with nothing to her name but a cloth bag and a child's tiara. Nkechi closed her eyes. She pressed her palms against the desk and breathed. This was not a puff piece. This was the story of a lifetime. She gathered her notes, her phone, her racing heart, and walked back toward the ballroom. She needed to talk to Micah Ashford, privately, tonight. Meanwhile, inside the ballroom, dinner was being served. Odera sat at table 1, a plate of food in front of her that she hadn't touched. Not because she wasn't hungry, she was always hungry, but because her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and she refused to let anyone see. Micah sat beside her. He had barely spoken to anyone else all evening. He ate quietly, glanced at Odera between bites, and at one point, without a word, reached over and gently moved her water glass closer to her so she wouldn't have to reach. "You must think I'm very strange," Odera said softly, not looking at him. "No, ma'am. A boy your age, bringing an old woman like me to a place like this." Micah considered this. "My dad says the foundation helps people who got forgotten. That's what tonight is about." He paused. "You looked forgotten." The simplicity of it hit Odera like a wave. She turned to look at the boy, really look at him, and for a moment she couldn't speak. His eyes were so steady, so unburdened by the weight of everything she carried. "I was a scientist once," she said. The words came out before she could stop them, like a door opening that had been locked for decades. "A long time ago, I worked in a laboratory in Lagos. I was trying to make medicine that could help people with malaria. Children, mostly. Children who were dying." Micah's eyes widened. "Did you do it?" Odera's gaze drifted to the far side of the table, where Graves was engaged in animated conversation with a woman in emeralds, his laugh carrying across the table like the sound of glass breaking. "I did," she said quietly, "but someone else took the credit." Before Micah could respond, a hand touched Marcus's shoulder from behind. He turned. Nkechi Okafor stood there, press badge visible, her face a careful mask of professional calm that barely concealed the earthquake underneath. "Mr. Ashford," she said quietly, "I need 5 minutes of your time, in private. It's about your guest of honor." Marcus looked at her, then at Odera, then at Graves, who was laughing at the far end of the table as if the world belonged to him. "Follow me," Marcus said. Marcus led Nkechi down a corridor lined with framed photographs. Images of the Ashford Foundation's work across 3 continents, smiling children, gleaming hospitals, ribbon cuttings. They stepped into his private study, and he closed the door behind them. The muffled sound of the string quartet disappeared, replaced by the kind of silence that makes words feel heavier. "You have 5 minutes," Marcus said. He didn't sit. Neither did she. Nkechi placed her phone on the desk between them. On the screen was the 1986 photograph of Dr. Odera Nwosu in her laboratory. "Do you recognize her?" Nkechi asked. Marcus leaned forward. He studied the image, the young woman in the white coat, the confidence in her posture, the way she held the petri dish like it contained the answer to a prayer. Then he looked up. "That's the woman in my ballroom," he said slowly. "Her name is Dr. Odera Nwosu. She was a pharmaceutical chemist at the University of Lagos in the 1980s. She developed a synthetic compound called OD7, an artemisinin derivative that showed extraordinary promise in treating drug-resistant malaria. Her research was published in the West African Journal of Pharmaceutical Sciences in 1986. Marcus waited. His face was still, but his eyes had changed. They had the look of a man who could feel the ground shifting beneath him. In 1989, Nkechi continued, Dr. Nwosu's publications stopped completely. Her name disappeared from every academic database. 2 years later, in 1991, the exact same research, identical methodology, identical molecular structure, identical trial protocols, was published under the name of an American researcher who had spent a sabbatical year at the University of Lagos. She paused. Let the silence do its work. Professor Lionel Graves, Marcus said, not a question. A realization landing like a hammer. Graves renamed the compound GR91, patented it through his own biotech firm, and built his entire career on it, every derivative, every licensed formulation, every patent in the family. All of it traces back to OD7, back to her. Nkechi met his eyes. And Mr. Ashford, your company's anti-malarial drug line, the one that's generated over $2 billion in revenue, is built on patents licensed from Graves Biotech, patents that originate from stolen research. The room went very quiet. Marcus could hear his own breathing. He could hear the blood moving through his temples. You're telling me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, that the foundation of my most profitable division, the drugs we've been manufacturing, selling, distributing for almost a decade, is built on work that was stolen from a woman who is currently sitting at my dinner table in a borrowed dress. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Marcus turned away. He walked to the window and looked out at the gardens below, the fairy lights strung between the oaks, the valets parking Bentleys and Mercedes along the curved driveway, the world he had built glittering like a jewel in the Texas night. All of it, every last piece, suddenly felt like it was sitting on a crack he hadn't known was there. How solid is your evidence? He asked, without turning around. The 1986 paper and the 1991 paper are functionally identical. I can show you the side-by-side comparison. The patent filings trace a direct line from GR91 to your licensing agreements, and Graves's reaction when he saw her tonight, Mr. Ashford, that man recognized her. I watched it happen. Marcus pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. He closed his eyes. He thought about Baton Rouge, about the apartment with no electricity, about his mother folding hospital laundry at 2 a.m. so he could study chemistry. He had built Ashford Pharmaceuticals to mean something, not just profit, but purpose. He had told himself every single day for 20 years that he was different from the people who had kept him down, that his wealth was clean, that his empire was honest. And now a journalist was standing in his study telling him that it wasn't. What are you going to do with this? He asked. I'm going to publish it, Nkechi said, with or without your cooperation, but I'd rather have it with. Marcus turned to face her. Give me tonight. Don't publish anything until after the gala. Why? because I need to talk to Graves first." Nkechi studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and left the room. Marcus stood alone in his study for 3 full minutes. Then he picked up his phone and called Harold Kinsey. Harold arrived in 7 minutes flat, a personal record for a man who prided himself on never rushing. He was 60, heavy-set, with reading glasses perpetually perched on the bridge of his nose and a face that had been weathered by 30 years of corporate law. He had been Marcus's attorney since the beginning, before the billions, before the foundation, before any of it. "Tell me what's happening," Harold said, settling into the leather chair across from Marcus's desk. Marcus told him all of it. Odera, Graves, the stolen research, Nkechi's evidence, the licensing agreements, the $2 billion drug line. Harold listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Harold removed his glasses, cleaned them with his tie, and put them back on. A ritual Marcus had seen 1,000 times. It meant Harold was thinking about something he didn't want to say. "Marcus," Harold said carefully, "if you go public with this, if you accuse Graves of intellectual theft, if you acknowledge that Ashford's anti-malarial line is built on stolen patents, you're not just losing a business partner. You're inviting every regulatory body, every shareholder lawsuit, every competitor you've ever had to come after you. Graves will fight. He has the resources, the connections, and the legal team to drag this out for a decade. Your stock price will collapse. Your board will revolt. The foundation itself could be at risk. I know. Then you also know that the smart play, the strategic play, is to let the journalist publish her story, express shock and outrage, launch an internal review, and distance yourself from Graves slowly, over months, in a controlled way. And Odera?" Harold paused. "She'd be a footnote, a tragic story, the kind people share on social media for a week and then forget." Marcus looked at his oldest friend. "Is that what you're recommending?" Harold met his gaze. For the first time in 20 years of friendship, something shifted in the older man's expression, something that looked uncomfortably like shame. "I'm recommending what protects the company," Harold said. "That's my job. And what about what's right?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy as stone. Harold opened his mouth, closed it. He had no answer for that. He had spent his entire career making sure Marcus never had to ask it. Marcus stood up. "I'm going to talk to Graves. Right now." "Marcus, stay here." He walked out of the study and back toward the ballroom, his heart hammering, his mind already rehearsing the conversation he was about to have with the man he had trusted for 8 years. The man who, it turned out, had built his throne on a stolen crown. Marcus found Graves on the terrace, standing alone with a glass of scotch, staring out at the estate gardens as if he owned them. The fairy lights cast soft patterns across his face, and the Texas night was warm and still. From inside, the muffled hum of conversation and clinking crystal drifted through the open doors. "Lionel," Marcus said. Graves turned. His smile was automatic, the kind that had charmed investors and university boards and congressional subcommittees for 3 decades. "Marcus, wonderful evening. The foundation has really outdone itself this year. I need to talk to you about the woman at table 1. Something moved behind Graves's eyes, a tightening, almost imperceptible, but Marcus had spent his career reading faces across boardroom tables, and he saw it. "The guest of honor?" Graves said lightly. "Your son's little project? Charming, really. Quite the humanitarian gesture. Her name is Odera Nwosu." The name landed between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Graves didn't flinch. He was too practiced for that. But his fingers tightened around the Scotch glass, just slightly, just enough. "I'm not familiar," Graves said. "I think you are." Marcus stepped closer. University of Lagos, 1986, Pharmaceutical Chemistry Department. She developed a compound called OD7, a synthetic artemisinin derivative for drug-resistant malaria, published her findings in the West African Journal of Pharmaceutical Sciences. Graves took a slow sip of his scotch. "Marcus, I've collaborated with hundreds of researchers over the years. I can't be expected to remember every—" "You published her work under your name in 1991. You renamed OD7 to GR91. Same compound, same methodology, same molecular structure, same trial data. You filed the patents through Graves Biotech, and those patents are the foundation of every anti-malarial license you've ever sold, including the ones you sold to me." The terrace went silent. Even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. Graves set his glass down on the stone railing, very slowly, very carefully. When he turned to face Marcus, the charming mask had been replaced by something colder, something that had been hiding beneath the surface for 30 years. "You need to be very careful about what you're suggesting," Graves said. His voice had dropped to a register that Marcus had never heard before, low, controlled, and carrying the unmistakable weight of a threat. "Very, very careful. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what I know." "What you know?" Graves let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "What you know is based on what? Some scanned article from a third-world journal that hasn't been in print since the Cold War? A homeless woman's word against mine?" "Marcus, do you understand what I've built? I have 40 years of peer-reviewed publications, 6 honorary doctorates, a building named after me at MIT. I sat on the WHO advisory board. I've been cited more times than most universities. And none of it would exist without her." Graves's jaw tightened. For a long moment the two men stood facing each other in the warm Texas night, the fairy lights dancing between them like spectators at a duel. Then Graves stepped forward, close enough that Marcus could smell the scotch on his breath. "Let me be clear," he said softly. "If you pursue this, if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will pull every contract, every license, every compound that Ashford Pharmaceuticals depends on for my portfolio. That's $400 million a year in revenue, Marcus. Gone. Overnight." Marcus didn't blink. "And that's just the beginning," Graves continued. "I will have my legal team file a defamation suit so large it will make your head spin. I will call every contact I have on every regulatory board in this country. I will make sure that by the time I'm done, your name is synonymous with fraud. You'll spend the next decade in courtrooms instead of boardrooms. Your foundation? Dead. Your reputation? Destroyed. Your son will grow up watching his father lose everything." He paused. "Let that sink in. Over a woman no one remembers and no one cares about." The words hung in the air like poison. Marcus felt them. Everyone. He felt the weight of $400 million. He felt the shadow of a decade of litigation. He felt the cold, practical truth that Graves was not bluffing. The man had the resources, the connections, and the ruthlessness to do exactly what he was threatening. And for a moment, one terrible, honest moment, Marcus considered walking away, going back inside, finishing the gala, letting the night end the way it was supposed to end. He could deal with this quietly, slowly, the way Harold had suggested, the smart way, the safe way. Then he heard a sound, faint, carried on the night air from somewhere behind the terrace doors. A child's voice, Micah's voice, talking softly to someone. Marcus turned and looked through the glass. There, just inside the ballroom, near the doors to the terrace, Micah sat on a low bench beside Odera. The old woman had her head bowed. Micah had placed his small hand over hers. He was speaking to her, and though Marcus couldn't hear the words, he could see the expression on his son's face. A gentleness so complete, so unguarded, that it made Marcus's chest ache. He turned back to Graves. "You're right about one thing," Marcus said. "This will cost me. Maybe everything." He straightened his shoulders. "But my son walked 3 blocks to crown that woman because he saw something the rest of us were too blind or too afraid to see. And if I walk away from this tonight, I won't be able to look him in the eye tomorrow morning." Graves stared at him. The cold mask cracked, just for a second. And beneath it, Marcus saw something he hadn't expected. Not rage, not calculation, but fear. The fear of a man who had spent 30 years running from a lie and could feel the ground finally giving way beneath his feet. "You're making a mistake," Graves whispered. "No," Marcus said. "I've been making a mistake for 8 years. Tonight, I stop." He turned and walked back inside, leaving Graves alone on the terrace with his empty glass and the sound of crickets and the slow, inevitable feeling of walls closing in. Marcus didn't go back to the ballroom, not yet. He went to the terrace doors, opened them quietly, and stepped inside. Not toward the stage, not toward the bar, but toward the bench where his son was sitting beside Odera. He stood a few feet away, half hidden by a marble column, and listened. Micah was holding Odera's hand. The old woman's head was bowed, her silver hair catching the candlelight, the tiara glinting softly above her temples. She looked smaller than she had on the curb, as if being inside this world of crystal and silk had made her shrink rather than grow. "Miss Odera," Micah said, "can I ask you something?" "Yes, child." "When you made the medicine, the one for the sick children, were you happy?" Odera was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice came from somewhere deep, not from her throat, but from a well that had been sealed shut for decades. "It was the happiest I have ever been," she said. "I remember the night I saw the first results. I was alone in the laboratory. It was very late, 2, 3 in the morning. The data was on the screen in front of me, and I kept checking it again and again because I could not believe what I was seeing. The compound worked. It was working better than anything we had tried before." She paused. Her hand tightened around Micah's. "I called my mother. She was in our village, in Suka, in the east of Nigeria. She didn't understand the science, but she heard it in my voice. She said, 'Odera, you sound like you did when you were a little girl and you found a butterfly in the garden.' And that is exactly how it felt, like I had caught a butterfly, something beautiful and fragile and mine." "What happened to it?" Micah asked. "The butterfly?" Odera's eyes drifted across the ballroom. They found Graves. He had returned from the terrace and was standing near the bar, talking to a cluster of guests, his composure restored, his smile back in place. The mask. Always the mask. "Someone opened my hands," Odera said softly, "and took it away." Behind the column, Marcus closed his eyes. He pressed his back against the cold marble and felt something break inside him. Not dramatically, not with a sound, but slowly, like ice melting in spring. A fracture that had been widening all evening finally gave way. He thought about his mother, the laundry room at the hospital, the fluorescent lights. Her hands, cracked and dry from bleach, folding sheets at 2 in the morning so her son could have a chance. If someone had stolen his mother's work, if someone had taken everything she'd sacrificed for and put their own name on it, what would he want the world to do? He already knew the answer. He had always known. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Harold. "Get to the study," he said. "Now." Harold was there in 2 minutes, his face already arranged into the expression of a man preparing to talk someone out of something catastrophic. "Don't," Marcus said before Harold could open his mouth. "Don't try to talk me out of it. I need you to do something for me." "Marcus, I need you to prepare a statement, tonight, announcing the immediate suspension of all licensing agreements with Graves Biotech, pending a full independent investigation into the origins of the GR91 patent family. I need a forensic audit team on retainer by Monday morning, and I need you to connect me with a patent attorney who specializes in intellectual property theft, international scope going back to the 1980s. Harold stared at him. His glasses had slipped down his nose, and he didn't push them back up. "You understand what you're asking? You're talking about nuking the single most valuable partnership this company has. $400 million a year, Marcus. The board will do what I tell them. I'm the majority shareholder. The stock price will recover, or it won't. Either way, I'll be able to sleep at night." Harold took off his glasses. He cleaned them, He put them back on, and then he did something Marcus had never seen him do in 20 years. He smiled, a small, tired, genuine smile. "You know," Harold said quietly, "I've been your lawyer for 2 decades. I've protected you from everything. Bad deals, bad press, bad people. But I think tonight might be the first time I've actually been proud of you." Marcus looked at his oldest friend. "Does that mean you'll do it?" "I'll have the statement drafted in 30 minutes. Harold paused at the door. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to take that stage," Marcus said, "and I'm going to tell 300 people the truth." Harold nodded and left. Marcus stood alone in the study. He straightened his tie. He adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at himself in the mirror on the wall, the charcoal suit, the clean lines, the face of a man who had once owned one pair of shoes with holes in them. And he asked himself the question that his son had answered without hesitation on a cracked sidewalk 3 blocks from this house. "What kind of man do you want to be?" He walked out of the study, down the corridor, past the photographs of smiling children and gleaming hospitals, and back toward the ballroom. The string quartet was playing something soft and elegant. 300 guests were finishing dessert, leaning into conversations, checking their phones, waiting for the evening's program to begin. Vivienne intercepted him at the ballroom entrance. She saw his face, and her own went pale. "Marcus, what are you about to do?" "The right thing." "Marcus, please. Think about what this means. Think about Micah. Think about—" "I am thinking about Micah." He took her hands, held them. "Viv, our son walked 3 blocks to put a crown on a woman the entire world forgot. He didn't ask what it would cost. He didn't ask what people would think. He just did what was right. And I have spent this entire evening trying to figure out how to be as brave as a 9-year-old boy." He squeezed her hands. "I figured it out." Vivienne's eyes glistened. She didn't speak. She didn't argue. Something in her husband's voice, something raw and irreversible, told her that this was no longer a negotiation. This was a man who had made peace with the consequences. She let go of his hands. She stepped aside. Marcus walked toward the stage. The ballroom fell silent the moment Marcus stepped onto the stage. Not because of anything he said. He hadn't spoken yet. It was the way he moved. 300 guests had seen Micah Ashford give speeches before, polished, measured, the kind of addresses that ended with standing ovations and checkbooks opening. But tonight, something was different. He walked to the microphone the way a man walks into a fire he has chosen not to escape. The string quartet stopped playing. Servers froze mid-step. Vivienne stood near the back of the room, her fingers pressed against her lips, her eyes locked on her husband. Marcus gripped the podium with both hands. He looked out at the room, the sequins and the diamonds, the senators and the surgeons, the cameras and the candlelight. He found Micah, still sitting on the bench near the terrace doors, still beside Odera. The boy looked up at his father with an expression of absolute trust. Marcus took a breath. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. 10 years ago, I started the Ashford Foundation because I believed that wealth without purpose is a prison. I believe that those of us who have been given much owe something to those who have been given nothing. I still believe that." He paused. The silence was total. "Tonight, my son Micah was given the honor of choosing our guest of honor. Many of you expected him to choose a celebrity, a politician, someone whose name you'd recognize. Instead, he walked 3 blocks from this house and found an elderly woman sitting on a curb. She was wearing torn clothes and had nothing to her name. He placed a tiara on her head and told her she was a queen. A murmur moved through the room. Marcus pressed on. "Some of you thought that was a mistake, a child's naivety. I'll admit, for a moment I thought so too. But my son saw something the rest of us missed. He saw someone who deserved to be seen." Marcus looked across the room to where Graves stood near the bar. The professor's face was a mask of stone, but his knuckles were white around his glass. "The woman my son chose is Dr. Odera Nwosu. She is a pharmaceutical chemist. In the 1980s, working at the University of Lagos, she developed a groundbreaking compound, a synthetic artemisinin derivative called OD7 that showed extraordinary promise in treating drug-resistant malaria. Her research had the potential to save millions of lives, millions of children. The room was so quiet Marcus could hear the candles flickering. In 1989, that research was stolen. A colleague who had spent a sabbatical year at her university took her work, her data, her molecular formulas, everything, and published it under his own name. He patented it. He built a career on it. He became one of the most celebrated pharmaceutical researchers in the world. And Dr. Nwosu, the woman who actually created the science, lost everything. Her career, her livelihood, her dignity. She has spent the last 6 years living on the streets. The murmur that moved through the room now was not curiosity. It was shock. 300 heads turned, searching, trying to identify the person Marcus was talking about. The man who stole her work is in this room tonight. The shock became a gasp, a wave of it moving from table to table like a physical force. Marcus looked directly at Graves, Professor Lionel Graves. Every eye in the ballroom swung toward the bar. Graves stood motionless. His face had gone gray. The glass in his hand trembled, a vibration so slight that only those closest to him could see it. "I want to be transparent," Marcus continued, his voice steady and clear. Ashford Pharmaceuticals has been licensing compounds derived from Professor Graves's patents for nearly a decade. Our anti-malarial drug line, which has generated billions in revenue, is built on that technology. Tonight, I have learned that this technology was not his to sell. It belongs to Dr. Nwosu. It always did. He gripped the podium harder. Effective immediately, I am suspending all licensing agreements with Graves Biotech. I am launching a full independent investigation into the origins of these patents, and I am committing Ashford Pharmaceuticals to the complete restoration of Dr. Nwosu's intellectual property, her name, and her legacy. Whatever that takes, however long it takes, whatever it costs. The room erupted, not in applause, not yet, but in a roar of voices, chairs pushing back, people standing, cameras flashing. Graves set down his glass, turned toward the exit, and began walking, fast, head down, jaw clenched. 2 security guards stepped into his path, not blocking him, just present. Graves stopped. He looked back across the ballroom at Marcus, and for one raw, unguarded moment, the mask fell away completely. What was underneath was not anger. It was the face of a man who had been running for 30 years and had just felt the ground open beneath his feet. He turned and walked out through the service corridor. The cameras followed him. The whispers followed him. The truth followed him. Marcus stepped back from the podium. "I'd like to invite our guest of honor to the stage," he said, "Dr. Odera Nwosu." The ballroom went still again. Micah stood up. He offered Odera his hand. She looked at it. This small hand, attached to this small boy who had, in the space of a single afternoon, done what no court, no university, no government had done in 30 years. He had given her back her name. She took his hand. She rose. They walked together through the ballroom. 300 guests watched in silence as a 9-year-old boy in a vest and bow tie escorted a 78-year-old woman in a borrowed dress to the stage of the most important gala in Houston. Odera reached the microphone. She stood there for a moment, looking out at the faces, the wealth, the power, the cameras. Her hands were shaking. The tiara glinted on her head. "My name is Odera Nwosu," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I was born in Nsukka, Nigeria. I spent 15 years of my life in a laboratory trying to make medicine that would stop children from dying of malaria. I succeeded, and then the world forgot I existed." She paused. A tear ran down her left cheek, but she did not wipe it away. "For 6 years I have been living on the streets of this city. I have slept under bridges. I have eaten from the trash. I have watched people walk past me as if I were invisible, and I had accepted, truly accepted, that I would die that way. forgotten, erased, as if my life and my work had never happened. Her voice steadied. Something old and fierce rose up behind her eyes. And then a boy knelt down in front of me on a curb and placed a crown on my head. He did not ask who I was. He did not ask what I had done. He simply saw me, and that, after everything, was enough. The room broke, not dramatically, quietly, deeply, the way a dam breaks from the inside. People wept. Senators wiped their eyes with silk pocket squares. The string quartet's cellist pressed her hand against her mouth. Micah Ashford, standing at the back of the ballroom, closed her eyes and let the tears come. Not tears of embarrassment, but of something she hadn't felt in a very long time, shame. And underneath the shame, gratitude that her son had been braver than she was. Odera stepped back from the microphone. Micah was waiting for her at the edge of the stage. He took her hand again and helped her down the steps, as carefully as if she were made of glass. Marcus met them at the bottom. He looked at his son, then at Odera. Then he did something that no one in that ballroom expected. He bowed. A deep, slow, deliberate bow in front of 300 guests and every camera in the room to a woman the world had thrown away. "Welcome home, Dr. Nwosu," he said. Later that night, long after the guests had gone, long after the cameras had been packed away and the caterers had cleared the tables and the fairy lights had been turned off one by one, Micah and Odera sat together in the mansion's garden. The Houston sky was clear and full of stars. The air smelled of jasmine and freshly cut grass. Odera still wore the tiara. She reached up and touched it almost absently, as if checking that it was still there. "You know," she said softly, "when you put this on my head this afternoon, I thought it was a toy, a trinket." "It is a trinket," Micah said. Odera smiled, the first real smile she had smiled in years. "Then why does it feel like the most valuable thing I own?" Micah thought about this. "Because someone gave it to you," he said simply. And they meant it. Odera looked at the boy. She placed her thin, weathered hand over his small one. The stars turned above them. The jasmine breathed. And for the first time in 6 years, Odera Nwosu did not feel invisible. She felt like a queen, because a child had decided she was one.